What is the reason of adding so much resolution to smartphone sensors? Because the current technology with which the lenses are built is not even capable of resolving 20 megapixels from a smartphone sensor. The high resolution camera sensor from Samsung, the S22 Ultra, the S21 Ultra has really poor low light videos because it has to work really hard to shoot that video because it is having such small pixel size. The ISO has to increase and then the processor has to reduce the noise on the image, and overall the image has no details and it just looks very bad. Inherent disadvantage because the resolution is so high and the pixels are so small is just an issue, only causing disadvantages. More heat, lesser quality videos in low light, lesser quality pictures in low light, more noise, night mode taking longer to shoot the pictures and low light. Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Now I know I haven't been posting for the last quite a few days, couple of weeks I haven't posted, but that's because I was really busy, guys. Turns out managing 2 YouTube channels and working a full-time job, it's not easy. So anyways, I'm still trying to make videos. I have some videos in the pipeline that are going to be published in the near future, so stay tuned. And obviously guys, Flipkart Big Billion Days are coming, so I'll make the relevant videos regarding offers and deals and suggestions and all those things. So definitely those videos are coming out, so please stay tuned. And if you're new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel. Let's get to 1000 subscribers as soon as possible. Alright guys, without any further ado, let's get to the topic of this video. So in this video, what I'm going to discuss is basically I'm going to give my opinion on the rise of these high resolution smartphone camera sensors and why I don't particularly like it, or I would like to say the direction of innovation is going in the wrong way. So what prompted me to make this video was, actually I've been waiting to make this video for a really long time. So what finally prompted me to make this video was ever since the release of the Galaxy S20 Ultra series, where there was a massive jump in terms of the resolution of the main sensor. So the Galaxy S20 debuted, the Ultra model debuted the Samsung's 108 megapixel sensor, which was slightly improved for the S21 Ultra and then slightly improved for the S22 Ultra. And I'm not sure if many of you have observed or not, but ever since the Galaxy S20 Ultra, or ever since Samsung's jump into these really high resolution sensors, their video quality has dropped quite a lot. I'm not sure if people know about it or not, but have people observed the coincidence or not, but there is a relation between the two things. And this is what I'm going to talk about in this video. This video is not a scripted video, so I'll try to make the video short, but yeah, it is what it is. So ever since these high resolution sensors came into the Samsung Ultra flagships, you'll observe that ever since the Galaxy S10, Samsung's video quality has gone down. Samsung used to be known as the best in terms of video quality, the Samsung Galaxy phones, when it comes to the Android phones. So among the Android world, Samsung used to be hailed as the best video camera. However, ever since those high resolution sensors came out, their video quality has taken a nosedive. I'm not sure if you're able to observe it or not. If you have used phones like the Galaxy S7, Galaxy S6, Galaxy S8, S10 even, if you go back and take videos with those phones, you will observe a certain type of quality, certain softness. There is a certain purity or natural type of image coming out in those videos. But when you take a look at video, let's say you are shooting 4K 60 FPS on the Galaxy S21 Ultra or the S22 Ultra, you'll observe that the videos are really poor, like they are very artifacty, there is so much noise, the videos are just look low resolution, they don't look 4K. And probably the main reason is that it is actually not a 4K video. I think it's something like 720p upscaled to 60 FPS. The reason why I'll explain as I go on, but there is definitely a relation between these high resolution sensors and lower video quality in these smartphones, and it is the truth. So let's talk about it in this video, and yeah, let's get started. So let's start with some very basics. Those who don't know about real cameras, let me explain this to them. So for example, currently I'm filming this video on my newly purchased Sony a6100, which has a Sony APS-C sensor. So APS-C is the size of a sensor. So in the world of real cameras, there are three mainstream sensors. There are other digital sensors, but there are three mainstream sensors. So one is full frame, which is the basically 35mm version film that used to be shot. Full frame sensors are basically the digital version of that. So you have got full frame or 35mm, then you've got APS-C, which is this one, and then you've got micro four thirds, which is a smaller size than APS-C. So these are the three main types of mainstream sensors, digital sensors currently available in the market. Okay, so now you know about sensor size. So now let's say you have got two sensors, right? You have got two sensors which are released, let's say in the the same generation, let's say within the span of 1 to 3 years. Let's say they are in the same generation of sensors. I'm not talking about one sensor which is released in, let's say, 2010 and one sensor in 2022. That is not what I'm talking about. Let's say we have got two sensors from the same generation, both the sensors have the same size, right? Now let's say one is a 24 megapixel sensor and the other is a, let's say, 45 megapixel, or let's say a 48 megapixel sensor. Let's double it. Both are the same sensor size, both released in the same generation. Now the 48 megapixel sensor, as you know from common sense, that the 48 megapixel sensor will have much smaller size pixel compared to the 24 megapixel sensor. Obviously, right? If you have the same size and you have a set of pixels, 24 megapixels, 24 million pixels, and on the other hand you have got 48 million pixels in the same sensor size, then obviously each other pixels will be smaller, right? So what's the deal about the pixel size? So the thing about pixel size is that smaller is the pixel size, greater is the density obviously of the pixels in the same section, and as a result there is something called the signal to noise ratio. So what happens is that when you try to shoot those images in, let's say, in lower light situations where you're going to increase your ISO, when you increase the ISO, what you're basically doing is that you're electrically charging those pixels or those photo sites to absorb as much light as possible. So when you do that, when you have a bigger, like a greater density of pixels in the same image area or the same sensor area, there is more signal to noise ratio generated. Basically what happens is that the noise increases compared to the same sensor from the same generation but with lesser resolution, because that sensor has a lesser density, lesser pixel density. Each pixel is also larger. So this is the signal to noise ratio. This is a basic thing that I've told. Maybe I'll come back to it later. So you have got sensors, resolutions. Now let's move on to lenses. So you have a sensor. Now how will the sensor capture the image? For the image to converge and make a image on the sensor, you have to add a lens, right? Now when you add a lens on the sensor, the lens have two properties. One is the focal length and other is the aperture. Focal length is basically the you can say the angle of view. Let's say you have a greater number, let's say you have a 50 millimeter lens, so that would be the angle of view. Let's say you have a 80 millimeter lens, then the angle of view will be narrower, so it's more zoomed in. So more the focal length, more zoomed in you are. Currently I am filming on a 23 millimeter lens, right? Then you have got the bigger part, which is the aperture. So the aperture is the opening on the lens that allows the light to come through. Really sorry guys, there is a lot of noise, birds are chirping, so please bear with me, right? So then you have the aperture. So the aperture is the the pupil or the hole, or let's say the iris of the eye, through which the the light enters and converges at a focal point. So that's the opening through which the light enters. So smaller the aperture number, bigger is the opening. So let's say you have a 1.8 lens, so you have a opening, and then let's say I'm having a 1.4 lens. Currently I'm shooting it on a 23 millimeter f1.4 lens, and so the f1.4 is a bigger aperture than the f1.8 lens, right? So bigger the aperture, more light is entered through the lens. So simple, you have got sensor size, you have got sensor resolution, and now you have lens. So if you have the same sensor, greater the resolution, then you'll have more pixel density. So if you have a sensor with 24 megapixel, if you have the same sensor of the same generation with 48 megapixel and both are having, let's say, an f1.4 lens, then the 24 megapixel sensor will have a better signal to noise ratio, which means it will have lesser noise when you increase the ISO. Clear? Now let's talk about resolution and lens. This is a very important topic guys, because this is when I jump into smartphones. So let's come back to our original example. So we have got two sensors of the same generation, same sensor size. One is having 24 megapixel and the other is having a 48 megapixel sensor. Now here the lens matters a lot. So normally people will assume what? The 48 megapixel sensor will capture a much greater amount of detail, right? Technically right, but here comes the role of the lens. Now remember what I told you. The 24 megapixel sensor and the 48 megapixel sensor, if you compare the pixel size of each sensor, the 24 megapixel sensor will have a much bigger pixel size, which means also the pixels are less dense, and the 48 megapixel sensor will have a greater pixel density and lesser pixel size, right? So the density is more. Now comes the lens. So you take the two cameras with the two sensors, one is lesser resolution and the other is high resolution. Now let's say on the 24 megapixel sensor, you put a really high quality 50mm f1.8 lens, right? And on the 48 megapixel sensor, you put a lesser quality, let's say an older generation 50 megapixel f1.8 lens. When you take a picture with both the cameras, you will be expecting that the 48 megapixels camera will have a greater resolution or let's say more details than the 24 megapixel, right? But that is not going to happen. What's going to happen is that, I mean, this is highly likely that the 24 megapixel image will have greater details than the 48 megapixel image. The reason is that the high quality 50mm lens that I added on the 24 megapixel camera is capable of resolving the details captured by a 24 megapixel sensor, whereas the lens that I put on the 48 megapixel camera or the older lens is not having that level of resolving capacity as the newer 50mm lens. So the point that I want to make is that greater is the pixel density, the higher quality lens you need to put on that sensor to capture the real details, and lower is the pixel density, or let's say larger is the pixel size, it is easier to manage to capture the details. You can put lesser expensive lens, lesser quality, lesser complex lens on those sensors to capture the details. Got it, guys? Now let's compare this with smartphones. All right, so you have a full frame sensor with, let's say, 48 megapixel resolution, and then you have a tiny smartphone sensor with same 48 megapixel sensor, right? Now you can imagine from the size of the sensors that I'm showing you, you can imagine how much smaller the pixel size of the smartphone sensor will be, how much denser the pixels in the smartphone sensor will be. It will be so much more dense compared to the full frame sensor, the full frame 48 megapixel sensor. So can you imagine the quality of lens required to pull off that level, to pull off 48 megapixel data from that tiny sensor where the pixel density is so high? This is the biggest problem that we are currently facing with smartphones, and like that I am currently thinking, like, what is the reason of adding so much resolution to smartphone sensors? Because the current technology with which the lenses are built is not even capable of resolving 20 megapixels from a smartphone sensor. Yes guys, if you take a Galaxy S22 Ultra, which is having one of the best lenses in the industry, like I remember they started improving the lenses from the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, so they're having a really high quality lens on top of that 108 megapixel sensor, right? So if you take a 108 megapixel image using, you know, the special mode, I take a 108 megapixel camera, you know, sample from that main sensor, and if you compare that with, let's say, a 24 megapixel full frame camera with a decent lens, you will see that the full frame camera is out resolving, that it has that full frame camera with 24 megapixel is having a lot more details than the 108 megapixel image captured with the S22 Ultra. That's because the lens on top of that sensor is not capable of resolving that level of pixel density. It's simply impossible. With the current lens building technology for smartphones, you are completely unable to get that level of, to resolve that level of pixel density. It is impossible. Look at the size of the sensor, just look at the size of the lenses. Look at a 50mm f1.2 lens from Canon. Look at the size of that lens. It's massive, it's a giant lens. Can you imagine such a lens on top of our smartphones? Actually, our smartphones would require even bigger lens, because the pixel density is so high for our smartphones that you need a giant lens to actually resolve that amount of details. So basically, having high resolution smart sensors on our smartphones is kind of meaningless in my opinion, unless, you know, yeah, it's just meaningless, because I can't find any reason. Because why would you require the high resolution? Because your sensor, your lens is not able to, even you don't have the lens technology to resolve that amount of detail. So what is the use of such you know, high resolution sensors? Now let's come to the next point. All right, so I talked about the signal to noise ratio, right? So higher is the pixel density, higher will be the signal to noise ratio when every other variables is fixed, like you have the same aperture and let's say the same sensor size, same technology, right? Ultimately it comes down to the pixel density and the pixel size. Now if you have, let's say, a 48 megapixel full frame sensor and then you have a 48 megapixel smartphone sensor, you already know that the 48 megapixel smartphone sensor has much smaller pixels than the full frame sensor. As a result, in lower lighting scenarios, your smartphone has to do a lot of work. It has to shoot night mode, obviously, which means you cannot shoot moving subjects, you have to shoot still subjects with night mode, right? And when shooting night mode, your camera has to pixel bin, that is, that it has to combine multiple pixels and then, you know, shoot the image. That requires significant processing power, which will increase the heat output of the processor. Like the phone will become warmer when you shoot a lot of night mode pictures. Also, when you have such high pixel density, such small pixels, the night mode takes longer to process. Like if you have seen the Galaxy S20 series, S22 Ultra, the Ultra series, they take quite long, let's say 4-5 seconds they take to shoot one picture. That's because they're trying to gather as much light possible, because the sensor, the photo sites, the pixels are so small that they have to take a long exposure to get that crystal clear image. Whereas if you have larger sensors, then you would barely take, let's say, 1 or 2 seconds to take a picture. Let's say like my Galaxy S20 FE, even in extremely dark scenarios it goes at like 4 seconds, right? And in moderately dark scenarios it takes like 2 seconds to take the picture, because the sensor, the pixel size is much larger. My Galaxy S20 FE 5G has like 1.8 micron pixel size, whereas the Galaxy S22 Ultra has like 0.8 micron or something like that. So it's like almost 10 times smaller. The sensor size of the Galaxy S22 Ultra is much larger than the S20 FE 5G, but the pixels are very much smaller, like much smaller than the S20 FE 5G. Now obviously the S22 Ultra has a newer generation sensor, so it is inherently better in terms of ISO and noise and all those things, but it still has to work a lot harder to generate a proper exposure image in lower light, obviously, guys. Now let's talk about the main thing that I want to talk about, that is the video quality. Again, the same things applies, but the effect is, like, let's say, you know, magnified in video. So when you have larger pixels and you compare it against a smaller pixel of the same generation, let's say, again, two sensors same size from the same generation, one is higher resolution, one is lower resolution, right? Then again, just like we saw for the photos, for the videos, the same thing applies. In fact, it is even harder in videos. So again, the smaller sensor, the smaller pixel size of the sensor, it has a very hard time to actually, you know, get light into the sensor. So you have to increase the noise, and that increase of noise magnifies in videos, because you're doing 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. So it magnifies, the noise magnifies, it increases, right? The other very difficult thing about video is that video requires much lower resolution compared to like photos, because in videos, let's say you're doing 8K, you only need 33 megapixel. Let's say you're doing like let's say you're doing 4K requires only like 8.3 megapixel, something like that, right? Now imagine the S22 Ultra, right? It has a 108 megapixel sensor. Now if it wants to shoot, let's say 4K video, it only needs to use 8 point something megapixels, right? The problem is that it has so many pixels that it is very difficult to scan all the pixels and make an 8 megapixel image out of those all those pixels. If it could do that, if the S22 Ultra could scan all the 108 megapixels and compress it down to 8 megapixel and do this 30 times per second, then that would be the most detailed 4K video in the planet. But obviously it cannot do that, because it is very difficult for the processor to scan all the pixels and make a smaller, like let's say and make a lesser resolution image from the whole image, because that requires a lot of processing power to downsample it. For example, my Sony a6100, it is a 24 megapixel sensor, and to shoot 4K video, it is actually scanning 6K. It is shooting a 6K full sensor. It is shooting a 16:9 crop of the of the sensor. Okay, so it's like this. So the sensor is square, and it chops the top and the bottom and uses the full width of the sensor to shoot a 6K sample and downsamples it to 4K, which is the result. The video is super sharp with this a6100. It's a very detailed 4K image. Now can you imagine the S22 Ultra doing a 16:9 size crop from the sensor and using it to shoot the video. It is very difficult, guys. It is not possible for the S22 Ultra. The current processing technology doesn't allow for it, and even if it did, the smartphone would overheat very quickly, guys, very quickly. That is another reason that high resolution sensors are very bad for video. So what the S22 Ultra is actually doing is that it is actually not shooting 4K. It is shooting some very low resolution video, like skipping the lines, like skipping every 2 or 3 lines and taking that row of pixels and then shooting the video, which is why the resolution is so, it looks low. Doesn't look like 4K, guys. If you look at 4K 60 sample from an S22 Ultra, it doesn't look like 4K. It looks like 1080p or 720p. And then it is upscaling it, which is why the quality looks so poor, like very much poor compared to an iPhone, or let's say a better phone like a Xiaomi 12s Pro, which has a really great 1-inch sensor with 50 megapixel, much larger sensor size, much larger pixel size. And yeah, that's the reason, guys. Even the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra with the ISOCELL, with the Samsung ISOCELL GN1 sensor, which has got 50 megapixel, but the sensor size is much bigger, 1 by 1.18 inch. So lesser is the pixel density, greater the pixel size, better is the video quality. The processor also has to do much less work to shoot good quality video. There is less heating and it's just better. Like the best video cameras on the market right now, the Sony A7S III, which is a full frame sensor but only has 12 megapixels. Imagine that, just 12 megapixels in such a huge sensor. That's the result. That's the reason it is able to shoot such amazing low light videos with the Sony A7S III. But I'm not sure what Samsung is doing these days. They are increasing the resolutions, like the new 200 megapixel sensor is coming, right? I think the Motorola Ultra phone that just came out is using the sensor. I'm pretty sure, guys, the video will be really trash. It will be bad. In low light especially, it will be really poor. It will be very noisy. It's just physics, guys. It's simple physics. Smaller the pixel size, more difficult it is for the sensor to shoot a near crisp video from it. It either has to do line skipping, or it has to like overheat like crazy. The high resolution camera sensor from Samsung, the S22 Ultra, the S21 Ultra, has really poor low light videos because it has to work really hard to shoot that video, because it is having such small pixel size. The ISO has to increase, and then the processor has to reduce the noise on the image, and overall the image has no details and it just looks very bad. Obviously the Samsung's auto mode is not that good in low light for video. I have shown you in my S20 FE5G low light camera sample video. I have shown you how the pro mode is way better than the auto mode, but still the S22 Ultra has indefinite, like it has got just inherent disadvantage because the resolution is so high and the pixels are so small. It's just an issue. So I think, guys, it was a really long video, even though I wanted to make it short, but I just can't help it. These are just these are complicated topics and they require even further explanation. I haven't talked about many other things that we can talk about in terms of sensors and camera and all. This is very nerdy talk, but I wanted to talk about this situation over here. I think the innovation is going in the wrong way. It's more in like gimmicky and more advertisement friendly, like 200 megapixel, 100 megapixel. It's more advertise friendly, but the results are not that good, guys. The results are not that good. It's clear in the camera comparisons. Samsung is falling way behind in terms of video, so it's just unfortunate. And I think the real innovation needs to be done in terms of lens design. Lenses, smartphone sensor, the lenses that is used on the smartphones, it is very difficult, guys. Lens making is super challenging. It is very complicated to make a good lens, and imagine making a lens for such a pixel density, such high pixel density smartphone sensors, and you also have very limited space to put that lens. Otherwise you will be having a big bulge from the back of the phone. So I think the more innovation needs to be put into lens design and lens making for smartphones rather than focusing on really high resolutions, only causing disadvantages. More heat, lesser quality videos in low light, lesser quality pictures in low light, more noise, night mode taking longer to shoot the pictures at low light. So these are just big disadvantages that I am foreseeing with the Galaxy S23 Ultra, which is going to have the 200 megapixel sensor. So yeah, that's all I want to talk about in this video, guys. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a long video. Thank you for being patient, those who have made it till now. And do let me know what you think about these high resolution sensors coming in smartphones. Do you think they are worth it? Do you think they are providing the good results? Yeah, let me know. If you are also, let me know if you are like into real cameras and you know about cameras and all those things. Let's have a discussion in the comments. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned Do like, share, and definitely subscribe to the channel. And take care. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.